At 3:47 in the morning, I found myself sitting in my home office, staring at a text message that had just shattered everything I thought I knew about my children. The message wasn't from a stranger this time. It was from my own daughter Jessica, sent to what she clearly thought was a private family group chat that somehow included me by mistake. The words glowed on my phone screen like neon signs of betrayal. Mom's completely out of touch with reality. She has no idea how broke we all are, while she's sitting on millions. When she finally kicks the bucket, we'll be set for life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I scrolled up to see the entire conversation thread. There it was, months of messages between my 3 children, discussing my finances, my health, my future, and most disturbingly, their inheritance expectations in detail that would make a financial advisor blush. They had calculated everything down to the last penny, including the estimated value of my art collection, my real estate holdings, and even my jewelry. They had been watching me, cataloging my assets, and waiting. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and until that morning, I believed I had raised 3 loving, grateful children who respected the sacrifices I had made to build our family's wealth. At 62, I had worked tirelessly for 4 decades, transforming a small interior design business into a multi-million-dollar empire that included luxury hotels, residential developments, and commercial properties across the Pacific Northwest. My late husband Marcus had been my partner in those early years, but after his death from cancer 8 years ago, I had continued building our legacy alone, always with the assumption that everything I created would eventually benefit Jessica, Michael, and Sarah. The text thread revealed a different story entirely. Jessica, my eldest at 34, had been documenting my daily routines, noting when I took my medications, tracking my energy levels, and even photographing my medical appointments from across parking lots. She had compiled what she called a health timeline and shared it with her siblings, complete with speculation about my life expectancy based on amateur internet research. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She wrote about me like I was livestock being monitored for market value. Michael, 31 and supposedly my responsible middle child, had been equally calculating. He had researched the inheritance tax implications of my estate, consulted with financial advisors about trust structures, and even reached out to real estate appraisers to get preliminary valuations on my properties. He had done all of this without ever speaking to me directly about money, while simultaneously asking me for loans to cover his mortgage payments and his children's private school tuition. The hypocrisy was staggering. Sarah, my youngest at 28, had perhaps hurt me the most. She had been secretly photographing items in my home during family dinners, creating what she called an inventory list of valuable paintings, antiques, and collectibles. She had researched auction values and even contacted estate sale companies to understand the liquidation process, all while sitting at my dinner table, smiling at me, and telling me how much she loved spending time together. The conversation thread painted a picture of 3 adults who saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle between them and financial freedom. They discussed my outdated views on money, mocked my concerns about their spending habits, and dismissed my attempts to teach them financial responsibility as the ramblings of someone completely out of touch with reality. They had even given me a cruel nickname in their chats, the bank, reducing 4 decades of love, sacrifice, and hard work to nothing more than a financial institution they were waiting to inherit. As I read deeper into their messages, the scope of their planning became clear. They had divided up my assets among themselves in a detailed spreadsheet, allocating properties, investments, and personal belongings, as if I were already gone. Jessica had claimed the main house and the beach property, Michael had selected the commercial buildings and the stock portfolio. Sarah had chosen the art collection and my jewelry. They had even discussed how to handle the sentimental items that might not have monetary value, with the general consensus being that they would donate most of my personal belongings to charity, rather than deal with the clutter. The most devastating discovery was a series of messages about my attempts to stay connected with their lives. When I had surprised Sarah with a weekend spa trip for her birthday, She had complained to her siblings about having to babysit mom and pretend to be grateful for the outdated gift. When I had offered to help Michael with his business expansion by providing both capital and guidance, he had rolled his eyes in the group chat and called my advice completely irrelevant to modern business. When Jessica had invited me to her daughter's school play, she had apparently done so only because her siblings had pressured her to keep mom happy so she wouldn't make any crazy decisions with her money. Every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every phone call and text message over the past year suddenly looked different through this lens. My children had been performing for me, delivering carefully crafted performances designed to keep me satisfied while they waited for their inheritance. The grandchildren I adored, Jessica's 8-year-old daughter Emma and Michael's twins Jake and Lily, had been used as emotional leverage in this elaborate manipulation. When Emma had drawn me pictures, or when the twins had called me to share their school achievements, their parents had been calculating the emotional impact, measuring my responses, and adjusting their strategies accordingly. The financial details they discussed revealed just how much they had been paying attention to my business decisions and personal spending. They knew about the quarterly dividend payments from my investment portfolio, the rental income from my properties, and even the consulting fees I earned from occasional design projects. They had been tracking my bank account balances through casual conversations, noting when I made large purchases or charitable donations, and calculating how these expenditures might affect their future inheritance. What struck me most was their complete lack of understanding about how I had actually built our wealth. In their messages, they spoke about my success as if it had been inevitable, as if the money had somehow materialized without effort or sacrifice. They had no appreciation for the 18-hour days I had worked in the early years, the risks I had taken, the failures I had overcome, or the competitors I had outmaneuvered. To them, I was simply someone who had been lucky enough to inherit wealth, rather than someone who had created it through decades of relentless work. They also showed no awareness of my ongoing expenses or financial obligations. While they calculated their potential inheritance, they ignored the fact that I still had business loans to service, property taxes to pay, and charitable commitments to honor. They assumed that my visible lifestyle reflected my liquid net worth, not understanding that much of my wealth was tied up in illiquid investments and business assets. Their financial planning was based on fantasy numbers rather than reality. The group chat also revealed their attitudes toward my age and capabilities. They frequently referred to me as being past my prime, and suggested that I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. Jessica had even researched elder law attorneys and discussed the possibility of pursuing guardianship proceedings if I ever made financial decisions they disagreed with. They spoke about me as if I were already experiencing cognitive decline, despite the fact that I was running multiple successful businesses and had just completed my most profitable year ever. Their discussion of my social life was equally revealing. They mocked my friendships with other successful women my age, dismissing my book club as a gossip circle, and my charity work as showing off. They seemed threatened by the idea that I had a fulfilling life outside of my role as their mother and potential benefactor. When I had mentioned dating again, something I had been considering as I began to feel ready for companionship after Marcus's death, they had reacted with horror in their private messages, worried that a new relationship might threaten their inheritance prospect. The most chilling aspect of their conversation was how casually they discussed my mortality. They speculated about my health based on minor observations, celebrated when I seemed tired or stressed, and worried when I appeared too energetic or happy. They had turned my life into a macabre countdown, watching for signs that their waiting might soon be over. The love I thought they felt for me had been replaced by impatience for my death. As dawn broke outside my office windows, I realized that everything I had believed about my relationship with my children had been an illusion. The family dinners where they had seemed so interested in my stories were actually intelligence-gathering sessions. The concerned phone calls about my health were monitoring check-ins. The invitations to spend time with my grandchildren were strategic moves designed to maintain my emotional investment in their lives. I had spent 8 years since Marcus's death, believing that my children were my greatest source of comfort and pride. I had structured my business decisions around their future needs, turned down lucrative opportunities that would have required me to relocate because I wanted to stay close to them, and built my entire estate plan around the assumption. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That they would cherish and preserve the legacy Marcus and I had created together. The text thread revealed that they saw that legacy very differently. They planned to liquidate most of my business interests immediately upon inheriting them, sell the properties I had carefully selected and developed, and convert everything into cash that they could spend on their immediate desire. The hotels that bore my design signature would be sold to corporate chains. The residential projects that I had planned as sustainable communities would be flipped to the highest bidders. The art collection that Marcus and I had assembled over decades would be auctioned off piece by piece. They had also discussed how to handle my wishes for charitable giving, which I had mentioned in casual conversations over the years. Their consensus was that any philanthropic commitments I had made were feel-good nonsense that they would abandon as soon as legally possible. The scholarships I had established for disadvantaged students pursuing design careers would be terminated. The environmental conservation projects I supported would lose their funding. The community center I had planned to build in Marcus's memory would never be constructed. Reading their messages felt like attending my own funeral and discovering that the mourners were actually celebrating. Every expression of love they had given me over the past year now seemed calculated and false. Every time they had called me mom or told me they appreciated everything I had done for them, they had been lying. The grandchildren's hugs and drawings and excited phone calls had been orchestrated by parents who saw me as nothing more than a source of future wealth. The betrayal went beyond money, though the financial aspects were staggering enough. They had violated my trust, invaded my privacy, and reduced our relationship to a transaction. They had stolen my peace of mind, my faith in family bonds, and my confidence in my own judgment. Worst of all, they had turned my love for them into a weapon against me, using my desire to be a good mother and grandmother to manipulate and deceive me. As I sat in my office that morning, surrounded by photos of family vacations and achievements, awards from my business career, and mementos from my life with Marcus, I realized that I was completely alone. The people I had trusted most in the world had been plotting against me, watching me, and waiting for me to die. The future I had imagined, filled with family gatherings and grandchildren who would remember me fondly, was never going to exist. My children saw me as an inconvenience, an outdated relic standing between them and their desires. But as the shock began to wear off, something else started to emerge. Anger, yes, but also clarity. For the first time in years, I could see my situation without the emotional fog of parental love and obligation. My children had revealed their true nature, and now I had the power to respond accordingly. They had called me out of touch, but they were about to discover just how in touch I could be when I put my mind to it. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows of my office and illuminating the business degrees on my wall, the awards from professional organizations, and the newspaper clippings, documenting my rise from small business owner to industry leader. These reminders of my capabilities gave me strength as I contemplated my next moves. My children had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had assumed that because I loved them, I was weak. They were about to learn the difference between love and foolishness. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Catherine Morrison, the estate planning attorney who had helped me draft my will 5 years earlier. It was still early, but Catherine was known for being available to her high net worth clients at any hour. As I prepared to make the call that would change everything, I felt a sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced since the early days of building my business empire. My children thought they knew what was coming. They had their spreadsheets and their plans and their cruel little nicknames for me, but they had forgotten something crucial about the woman who had built everything they were so eager to inherit. I hadn't gotten where I was by being passive or predictable. I had succeeded by being strategic, decisive, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. They wanted to play games with my legacy, fine, but they were about to discover that I had been playing games at a much higher level for much longer than they realized, and unlike them, I actually knew the rules. Catherine Morrison answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional despite the early hour. "Eleanor, what can I do for you this morning?" She had been handling complex estate matters for wealthy families for over 20 years, and emergencies were nothing new to her practice. "Catherine, I need to see you today. Something has come to light about my children that requires immediate attention to my estate planning." I kept my voice steady, but Catherine's years of experience must have detected something in my tone. "Of course, can you be here by 9? I'll clear my morning schedule." This was why I paid Catherine's premium rates. She understood that when clients like me called before dawn, it meant serious business. "I'll be there at 9 sharp. And Catherine, I need you to prepare documentation for some significant change. We may need to restructure everything from the ground up." After ending the call, I spent the next few hours methodically documenting everything I had discovered. I took screenshots of every message in the group chat, carefully preserving the metadata that showed dates and time. I printed hard copies and organized them chronologically, creating a timeline of my children's surveillance and planning activities. This wasn't just emotional hurt anymore, this was evidence of a calculated campaign of deception that had serious legal implications. I also began my own research into my children's financial situations, something I realized I should have done long ago. Using the same investigative skills that had helped me identify profitable investment opportunities throughout my career, I started digging into their spending patterns, debt levels, and financial decisions. What I discovered was even more disturbing than their inheritance plan. Jessica, who had been borrowing money from me regularly to help with unexpected expenses, had actually been living far beyond her means for years. Her social media accounts, which I had rarely looked at closely, revealed a lifestyle of expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, and designer purchases that far exceeded what her marketing manager's salary could support. The money I had been lending her wasn't going toward legitimate emergencies. It was funding a lifestyle she couldn't afford while she waited for her inheritance to make it permanent. Michael's situation was similarly deceptive. His requests for business loans had been framed as temporary cash flow issues, but deeper investigation revealed that his consulting firm had been struggling for years. He had been using my money to prop up a failing business while telling me it was thriving. The expansion plans he had discussed with me weren't growth opportunities. They were desperate attempts to generate enough revenue to pay back his existing creditors. Sarah's financial irresponsibility was perhaps the most egregious. Despite claiming to be focused on her art career and living modestly, she had actually been day trading with money I had given her for living expenses. Her investment account showed a pattern of increasingly risky bets and devastating losses. She had blown through nearly $50,000 of my money in the stock market, while telling me she was saving for a down payment on a modest apartment. By the time I arrived at Catherine's office, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on my children's deception that would have impressed a private investigator. Catherine's office occupied the top floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, with panoramic views of Puget Sound that I normally found calming. Today, I was too focused on the task at hand to notice the scenery. Catherine greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that came from years of handling sensitive family matters. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed and radiating the quiet confidence that came from being one of the most respected estate planning attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. Her office was lined with law books and family photos, a reminder that she understood both the legal and emotional complexities of family wealth. "Eleanor, you look like you haven't slept," she observed as we settled into the comfortable chairs arranged around her conference table. "I have, Catherine. Everything I thought I knew about my children has turned out to be false." I placed the folder of evidence on the table between us. "They've been planning my death, cataloging my assets, and treating me like an inconvenience they're waiting to inherit." Catherine's expression grew more serious as I walked her through the text messages, explaining the context behind each revelation. She took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional detail. Her years of experience handling family disputes had clearly prepared her for situations like this, but I could see the concern in her eyes as the scope of my children's betrayal became clear. "Eleanor, this is concerning on multiple levels," Catherine said when I finished my presentation. Beyond the emotional betrayal, there are potential legal issues here. If they've been monitoring your health and making financial decisions based on assumptions about your life expectancy, that could constitute a form of financial elder abuse. That's exactly what I was thinking. But right now, I'm more concerned with protecting my assets and ensuring my actual wishes are honored, rather than their fantasies about liquidating everything I've built. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. Let's start with your current estate plan and identify what changes you want to make. Your existing will leaves everything to your children in equal shares, with some specific charitable bequests. Given what you've discovered, I assume you want to make substantial modifications. I want to revoke everything, complete restructure. They called me out of touch, so let me show them just how in touch I can be when it comes to estate planning. Over the next several hours, Catherine and I worked through a comprehensive revision of my estate plan. The new structure would accomplish several goals. It would protect my assets from my children's reckless spending habits, ensure my charitable intentions were honored, and send a clear message about the consequences of betraying family trust. The centerpiece of the new plan was a series of irrevocable trusts that would control the distribution of my wealth according to strict performance criteria. Instead of simply inheriting my assets upon my death, my children would need to demonstrate financial responsibility, professional achievement, and genuine personal growth to access their inheritance. The trusts would be managed by professional trustees, who would evaluate their progress annually, and distribute funds only when specific milestones were met. We'll structure it so that they have to earn what they previously expected to simply receive, Catherine explained, as she drafted the initial framework. The trust distributions will be tied to measurable achievements, maintaining steady employment for consecutive years, demonstrating financial literacy through certified courses, completing community service requirements, and showing genuine appreciation for your legacy through active participation in your charitable foundation. The trusts would also include clawback provisions that would reduce distributions if the beneficiary is engaged in certain behaviors, frivolous spending, gambling, substance abuse, or any attempts to contest the estate plan or manipulate other family members. The message would be clear: respect the conditions or forfeit the inheritance. For the business assets that represented the core of my wealth, we designed an even more sophisticated structure. My hotel properties and development projects would be transferred to a family foundation that would continue operating them as investments while generating funds for charitable purposes. My children could potentially earn positions on the foundation board, but only after demonstrating genuine commitment to its mission and completing extensive training in nonprofit management. This ensures that your business legacy continues while preventing them from simply liquidating everything for quick cash, Catherine noted. If they want to benefit from your empire, they'll have to learn how to preserve and grow it rather than destroy it. The art collection and personal property required special consideration. Rather than allowing my children to divide these items among themselves as they had planned, we established a rotating custody arrangement, managed by a museum-quality storage facility. Each child could display certain pieces in their homes for specific periods, but ownership would remain with the estate. This would prevent them from selling valuable items while still allowing them to enjoy the collection. What about the grandchildren? Catherine asked. Do you want to include provisions for Emma, Jake, and Lily? This was the most painful aspect of the revision. My grandchildren were innocent in their parents' scheme, but I had to consider the possibility that my children would use them as emotional leverage to contest the new estate plan. After considerable discussion, we decided to establish separate education trusts for each grandchild that would be completely independent of their parents' inheritance. These trusts would cover tuition, books, and living expenses for college and graduate school, but the funds would be paid directly to educational institutions rather than to my children. This protects the grandchildren's futures while preventing your children from accessing these funds for their own purposes, Catherine explained. It also demonstrates your continued love for the grandchildren while making it clear that their parents' behavior has consequences. The charitable components of the estate plan were expanded significantly. The community center I had planned to build in Marcus's memory
would be funded through a dedicated trust that would also establish an endowment for its ongoing operation. The scholarships for disadvantaged students would be increased and expanded to include mentorship programs and internship opportunities with my business partner. The environmental conservation projects would receive substantial funding through a separate foundation that would operate in perpetuity. By dramatically increasing your charitable giving, you're not only honoring your values, but also reducing the total amount available for your children to inherit, Catherine observed. This makes a powerful statement about your priority. As we worked through the details, Catherine also suggested some immediate protective measures. Given that your children have been monitoring your activities, we should consider whether they might attempt to challenge your mental competency if they discover you're changing your estate plan. I recommend we schedule a comprehensive evaluation with a geriatric psychiatrist who can document your cognitive abilities and decision-making capacity. The suggestion stung, but I recognized its wisdom. You think they might try to have me declared incompetent? Based on what you've shown me about their text messages, they're already questioning your judgment. If they suspect you've discovered their planning, they might escalate their tact. Having current documentation of your mental competency will strengthen the estate plan against any potential challenges. We also discussed the possibility that my children might be monitoring my financial accounts or communication. Catherine recommended that I open new bank accounts at a different institution and route all estate planning communications through her office to maintain confidentiality. We need to assume they're paying more attention to your activities than you realized, she cautioned. The legal documentation for the new estate plan would take several weeks to complete, but Catherine assured me that we could execute some immediate protective measures. She prepared a new will that would serve as an interim document, revoking all previous versions and establishing the basic framework for the trust structures we had discussed. This would ensure that if anything happened to me before the full documentation was completed, my assets would be protected, according to my revised intentions. Eleanor, I have to ask, are you certain you want to make such dramatic change? Once we execute these documents, there will be no going back. The irrevocable trusts cannot be easily modified, and your children will eventually discover that their inheritance expectations were completely incorrect. I thought about the question seriously.
Part of me wondered if there might be some way to reconcile with my children, to address their behavior through conversation rather than legal maneuvering. But then I remembered the casual cruelty of their text messages, the calculated nature of their surveillance, and their complete lack of appreciation for everything Marcus and I had sacrificed to build our wealth. Catherine, they made their choice when they decided to treat me like a bank account instead of their mother. I'm not punishing them, I'm protecting what Marcus and I built from people who would destroy it. If they want to benefit from our legacy, they can earn it the same way we did, through hard work, integrity, and respect for others. We spent the afternoon reviewing financial statements and asset valuations to ensure the new estate plan would be properly funded. Catherine's team would coordinate with my financial advisors and accountants to execute the asset transfers required for the trust structures. The process would be complex and expensive, but the protection it would provide was worth the investment. As we wrapped up our marathon planning session, Catherine handed me a secure phone that would be used exclusively for communications related to the estate planning process. Use this for any calls or text related to our work, she instructed. And Eleanor, be prepared for your children to notice changes in your behavior. If they're as observant as you've indicated, they'll sense that something is different. The drive home gave me time to process everything we had accomplished. In a single day, I had transformed from a grieving mother who had discovered her children's betrayal into a strategic planner implementing a sophisticated response. The new estate plan would protect my legacy while forcing my children to confront the consequences of their actions. They had wanted to inherit my wealth without earning it. Now they would have the opportunity to prove they were worthy of it. But the legal maneuvering was only the beginning. If my children were truly as calculating as their text messages suggested, they wouldn't simply accept the new estate plan without a fight. They would likely escalate their surveillance, increase their manipulation attempts, and possibly even enlist allies in their efforts to access my wealth. I needed to be prepared for a long-term campaign that would test not only my resolve, but also my strategic capabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children had criticized me for being out of touch, but their betrayal had actually reconnected me with the fierce determination that had built my business empire. They had awakened a side of me that had been dormant since Marcus's death, the part of me that could outmaneuver competitors and turn challenges into opportunities. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Jessica's car parked across the street. She was sitting behind the wheel, apparently waiting for me to return home. The surveillance they had discussed in their text messages was continuing, but now I was prepared for it. I waved cheerfully as I walked to my front door, giving no indication that anything had changed. Let them watch and wonder. They would discover the truth soon enough. That evening, I received the first test of my new resolve. Michael called with another request for a business loan, this one supposedly urgent and time-sensitive. His tone was perfectly calibrated to generate maximum emotional impact. Stressed but trying to be brave, apologetic about asking but desperate for help, confident that his loving mother would come through as she always had. "Mom, I hate to call with this kind of request, but we've hit an unexpected cash flow issue with the Johnson project. If I can't cover the contractor payments by Friday, we'll lose the entire contract. I know you've already helped us so much, but I'm wondering if there's any way you could bridge us through this crisis." Under normal circumstances, I would have transferred the money immediately. Michael's request sounded reasonable, his gratitude was effusive, and his promise to repay the loan within 60 days seemed credible. But now I listened with different ears, hearing the practiced manipulation in his tone and recognizing the calculated timing of his request. "Michael, that sounds serious. Have you considered other options? Bank loans, business lines of credit, or perhaps bringing in additional investors?" "Well, yes, of course, but those take time and we need the money immediately. You know how much this business means to me and how hard I've worked to build it. I just need a little help to get through this rough patch. I understand your situation, but I'm not comfortable making another loan without better documentation of your business's financial health. Why don't you send me your complete financial statements for the past 2 years, including tax returns and cash flow projections? Once I've had a chance to review everything with my accountant, we can discuss what kind of assistance might be appropriate." The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. Michael had clearly expected the same easy approval he had received for previous requests. The suggestion that I might actually evaluate his financial situation before lending him money was apparently unprecedented. "Mom, are you feeling okay? This isn't like you at all. It's just a short-term loan between family members. Why do we need all this formal documentation?" "Because, Michael, I'm trying to be more responsible with my financial decisions. I realize I've been too casual about family loans in the past, and I want to make sure I'm making choices that are truly in everyone's best interest. But Mom, this is an emergency. The contractor needs payment by Friday, and there isn't time for all this paperwork. Can't you just trust me? I've never failed to pay you back before." This was where the new me diverged sharply from the old version. The previous Eleanor would have been swayed by the emotional appeal and the time pressure. She would have prioritized family harmony over financial prudence and transferred the money with only Michael's word as security. But the new Eleanor had seen the text messages where Michael had laughed about my outdated approach to money and dismissed my business advice as irrelevant. "Michael, if this is truly an emergency situation, then you'll need to find another solution. Perhaps you could ask the contractor for a brief extension while you arrange financing through proper channels. Or maybe you could reach out to other family members or business associates. I'm not saying no permanently, but I am saying that I need more information before making such a significant financial commitment." The conversation ended with Michael sounding frustrated and confused. Within an hour, I received a text from Jessica asking if I was feeling well, since Michael had told her about our strange conversation. By evening, Sarah had called with her own attempt at gathering intelligence, casually asking about my day and whether anything unusual had happened. Their coordinated response confirmed that they were indeed sharing information about my behavior and strategizing together about how to handle any changes in my pattern. The family group chat I had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. They had clearly established a comprehensive communication network designed to monitor and influence my decisions. Over the following days, their surveillance intensified noticeably. Jessica began stopping by unexpectedly, always with plausible excuses but clearly conducting reconnaissance. Sarah started calling more frequently, asking detailed questions about my daily activities and health. Michael sent follow-up emails about the loan request, gradually increasing the emotional pressure while maintaining a tone of concerned confusion about my uncharacteristic behavior. But I was no longer the unsuspecting target of their manipulation. Catherine's team was working efficiently on the legal documentation. My financial advisors were implementing the asset protection strategies, and I was learning to navigate my children's deception with the same strategic mindset I had applied to business challenges throughout my career. The most interesting development was how much clearer my thinking became once I stopped trying to maintain the illusion of family harmony. Without the emotional burden of believing my children's performances, I could see their tactics objectively and respond accordingly. Their attempts at manipulation became almost amusing in their transparency. When Jessica arrived unannounced with Emma one afternoon, ostensibly for a spontaneous visit, I recognized it as an intelligence-gathering mission disguised as quality time with my granddaughter. Emma was indeed delighted to see me, but Jessica spent the entire visit scanning my home for changes, asking pointed questions about my recent activities, and probing for information about my financial planning. "Mom, you seem different lately," she observed as Emma played in the garden. "More distant, maybe. Is everything okay with your health? Have you been feeling stressed about anything?" "I'm feeling wonderful actually. More focused and energetic than I have in years. I've been making some positive changes in how I approach various aspects of my life." "What kind of changes? Are you working with any new advisors or consultants?" "Sometimes people your age can be vulnerable to questionable advice from financial planners or other professionals who might not have your best interests at heart." The irony of her warning about people who might not have my best interests at heart was breathtaking, but I maintained my composure. "I appreciate your concern, Jessica, but I'm very satisfied with my professional advisors. They've all been thoroughly vetted and come with excellent reputation." "Well, if you ever want a second opinion on anything, you know Michael and I both have experience with financial planning. We'd be happy to review any proposals or suggestions you're considering." "That's very thoughtful, but I'm comfortable with my current arrangement." I smiled warmly, giving no indication that I had discovered their true motivations. "How's work going for you? Are you still enjoying the marketing role?" The conversation continued with Jessica fishing for information while I deflected her questions politely but firmly. By the time she left, I could see her frustration with my lack of transparency. She had expected the same open communication about my financial affairs that I had previously provided, not realizing that her own text messages had destroyed my willingness to share personal information. That evening, I reviewed the progress on my estate planning with Catherine via our secure communication channel. The legal documentation was proceeding on schedule, but she had some additional recommendations based on her experience with similar family situations. "Eleanor, based on your children's behavior patterns, I think we should consider implementing a gradual revelation strategy. Rather than waiting for them to discover the changes after your death, we might want to inform them about certain aspects of the new estate plan while you're still alive to explain your reasoning." "Wouldn't that just give them more time to contest the changes or escalate their manipulation attempts?" "Possibly, but it might also give them an opportunity to modify their behavior if they're genuinely interested in maintaining their inheritance. The trust structures we've designed include provisions for restoring full benefits if they demonstrate sustained improvement in their conduct. If we reveal the changes strategically, we might be able to achieve your goals without completely severing the family relationship." I considered Catherine's suggestion carefully. Part of me wanted to maintain the element of surprise, allowing my children to discover the consequences of their betrayal only after it was too late to address them. But another part of me wondered if there might be value in giving them a chance to understand the impact of their actions and potentially make amends. What would a gradual revelation look like in practical terms? We could start by informing them about the new performance requirements for accessing their inheritance, without initially revealing that you've discovered their surveillance and planning activity. Present it as a natural evolution of your estate planning, rather than a response to their specific behavior. See how they react to the idea of earning their inheritance, rather than simply receiving it. The suggestion had merit. If my children were capable of genuine reflection and behavioral change, this approach would give them that opportunity. If they weren't, Their reactions would provide additional evidence of their true character and strengthen my resolve to maintain the restrictive trust structure. Let's plan a family meeting for next weekend. I'll tell them I want to discuss some updates to my estate planning and gauge their responses to the new approach. Depending on how they handle that conversation, we can decide whether to reveal more about what I've discovered. Catherine agreed to prepare talking points that would allow me to present the changes in the most constructive way possible. The meeting would be a crucial test of whether my children were capable of the kind of personal growth that might eventually restore my faith in them. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few days. The discovery of my children's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also liberated me from illusions that had been limiting my potential for years. For the first time since Marcus's death, I felt truly empowered to shape my own future according to my values, rather than my children's expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as my children continued their surveillance and manipulation attempts, but I was no longer their unwitting target. I had become a strategic player in a game I hadn't realized I was playing, and I was discovering that my skills in this arena were far more developed than my children had anticipated. The family meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at my home, a setting I chose deliberately to maintain the familiar comfort that might encourage honest conversation. I had spent the week carefully observing my children's continued surveillance efforts, while Catherine finalized the documentation that would reshape their financial futures forever. The irrevocable trusts were now legally established, the charitable foundations were funded, and my assets were protected behind layers of legal structures that would take teams of attorneys years to unravel. Jessica arrived first, punctual as always when family finances might be discussed. She brought Emma, who immediately ran to hug me with the genuine affection that reminded me why this situation was so heartbreaking. Children were innocent observers in adult deceptions, and Emma's pure love made the contrast with her mother's calculated behavior even more painful. "Grandma Eleanor, I made you something at school," Emma announced, pulling a handmade card from her backpack. The cover featured a crayon drawing of the two of us holding hands, with "I love you" written in the careful block letters of a third grader. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you so much." I hugged her tightly, wondering how Jessica could use such genuine moments as tools in her manipulation strategy. The text messages had revealed that even Emma's visits were planned and timed to maximize emotional impact on me. Michael arrived with his wife Patricia and the twins, creating the kind of cheerful family chaos that I had always treasured. Jake and Lily immediately began exploring my garden, their laughter echoing through the house as they chased butterflies and examined the flowers that Marcus and I had planted together decades ago. Patricia helped organize the children's activities while Michael surveyed my home with the same calculating gaze I had learned to recognize from Jessica. Sarah was the last to arrive, appearing slightly out of breath and apologetic about traffic delays that I suspected were fabricated to make a dramatic entrance. She had dressed more formally than usual, perhaps hoping to project maturity and responsibility for whatever financial discussion she anticipated. "Mom, you look wonderful," Sarah said, embracing me with enthusiasm that felt performance perfect. "That new skincare routine must be working. You seem so energetic and vibrant lately." The comment was classic, Sarah, appearing supportive while actually gathering intelligence about my health and daily habits. I smiled and thanked her for the compliment, giving no indication that I understood the real purpose behind her observation. Once everyone had settled in the living room with coffee and snacks, I took a deep breath and began the conversation that would change everything. "I wanted to bring you all together today to discuss some important updates to my estate plan. As you know, it's been several years since I last reviewed my will and financial arrangements, and I've decided it's time to make some modifications that better reflect my current values and priorities." The room grew noticeably quiet. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, though they continued playing quietly in the corner where Patricia was supervising their activity. My 3 adult children straightened in their seats, suddenly alert and focused in a way that confirmed my suspicions about their real interests in family gatherings. "What kind of modifications are you considering, Mom?" Jessica asked, her tone carefully neutral but her eyes sharp with attention. "Well, I've been thinking a lot about legacy,"
and what it means to truly prepare the next generation for financial responsibility. Rather than simply leaving everything to you in a traditional inheritance structure, I've decided to establish a series of trusts that will require you to demonstrate certain achievements and behaviors before accessing the funds. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my children processing this information, trying to understand what it meant for their carefully laid plans. Michael was the first to respond, his business background making him quicker to grasp the implication. Mom, when you say demonstrate certain achievements, what exactly do you mean? Are you talking about conditions on our inheritance? Exactly. I've realized that simply giving you wealth without ensuring you have the skills and character to manage it responsibly wouldn't be doing you any favor. The new trust structures will require you to meet specific milestones related to financial literacy, professional development, community service, and personal responsibility. Sarah leaned forward, her face showing the first signs of alarm. But Mom, we're adults with our own lives and careers. Why would you suddenly decide we need to prove ourselves worthy of our own inheritance? The question revealed so much about her mindset. She had referred to it as our inheritance, as if my wealth already belonged to them rather than being something I might choose to share based on their character and behavior. Her sense of entitlement was exactly what the new estate plan was designed to address. Sarah, I don't see it as proving yourselves worthy. I see it as ensuring that you develop the qualities that will help you preserve and grow whatever wealth you eventually receive. Think of it as an extended education program rather than a punishment. Jessica's marketing background made her particularly skilled at maintaining composure during difficult conversations, but I could see the tension in her posture as she absorbed the implications of my announcement. Mom, this seems like a very sudden change in your thinking. Have you been discussing this with new advisors? Sometimes estate planning attorneys can recommend overly complex structures that aren't really necessary for families like ours. Her attempt to blame outside influence for my decision was predictable, but it also revealed her assumption that I wasn't capable of independent strategic thinking. The patronizing undertone in her voice would have hurt me deeply just a week ago. Now it simply confirmed that my new approach was necessary. I've been working with Catherine Morrison, the same attorney who helped me with my previous estate planning. She's not recommending anything I haven't specifically requested. These changes reflect my own evolving understanding of what responsible wealth transfer should look like. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, I have to ask, are you concerned about something specific? Have we done something to make you question our judgment or financial responsibility? The question was perfectly crafted to sound hurt and confused while actually fishing for information about how much I knew regarding their surveillance and planning activity. If I had been operating from my previous emotional framework, I would have rushed to reassure him and possibly abandoned the entire estate planning revision to avoid damaging our relationship. Michael, this isn't about punishment or mistrust. It's about recognizing that inheriting wealth without earning it often leads to poor outcomes for the recipients. I've been reading research on generational wealth transfer, and the statistics are sobering. Most inherited fortunes are dissipated within 2 generations because the inheritors never developed the skills and discipline necessary to manage significant assets. This was technically true, though it wasn't the real reason for my decision. The research provided a convenient, rational framework for changes that were actually motivated by my discovery of their betrayal. But framing the discussion in terms of best practices for wealth transfer made it harder for them to argue against without appearing selfish or irresponsible. Patricia, who had been listening quietly while managing the children, spoke up for the first time. Eleanor, I think what Michael is trying to understand is whether this decision is based on general principles or specific concerns about our family situation. From our perspective, this feels like a significant change in your approach without much warning or discussion. Her diplomatic intervention was clearly designed to de-escalate the tension while still pressing for more information. Patricia had always been the most politically astute member of the family, which made her participation in this conversation particularly interesting. I wondered whether she had been aware of my children's surveillance activities, or if she was learning about the family dynamics for the first time. Patricia, you raise a fair point about the timing. I probably should have discussed my thinking with everyone before making final decisions, but I've reached an age where I feel urgency about ensuring my affairs are properly arranged. I don't want to leave you all with complicated legal situations or financial uncertainties. Sarah's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. Mom, can you be more specific about what these trust requirements would involve? Are we talking about annual evaluations or something like that? The requirements will vary for each of you based on your individual circumstances and challenges. For example, there will be educational components related to investment management, philanthropy, and business leadership. There will also be community service requirements and expectations for professional achievement in your chosen fields. And if we don't meet these requirements, Jessica asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion, then the distributions would be delayed until you do meet them. The trusts are designed to provide support and incentives for your development, rather than simply handing over large sums of money without any strings attached. The room fell silent again as my children absorbed the reality that their inheritance expectations were being fundamentally altered.
I could see them exchanging glances, engaging in the kind of silent communication that I now recognized as coordination for their surveillance and manipulation efforts. Michael cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the conversation. Mom, I appreciate your concern for our financial education, but I think you might be overestimating the need for such complex structures. We're all responsible adults with successful careers and families. We've been managing our own finances effectively for years. This statement was so at odds with what I knew about his actual financial situation that I had to suppress a laugh. His business was failing. He had been borrowing money from me regularly to cover basic expenses, and his idea of financial planning consisted of waiting for his inheritance to solve his problems. Michael, I'm glad you feel confident about your financial management skills. The trust structures will give you opportunities to demonstrate that confidence in measurable ways. If you're as capable as you believe, meeting the requirements should be straightforward. Sarah jumped in with a different approach. Mom, I'm worried that this kind of complicated legal structure might create unnecessary conflict within our family. We've always been close and supportive of each other. Why introduce elements that might breed competition or resentment between siblings? Her concern about family harmony was particularly ironic, given that she had been secretly photographing my belongings and researching their auction value. The family closeness she referenced was entirely one-sided, existing only in my imagination while they planned for my death and competed for my assets. Sarah, the trust structures are designed to encourage collaboration rather than competition. There are family-wide goals that require you to work together, and individual achievements that complement rather than conflict with each other. If anything, this should strengthen your relationships by giving you shared purposes beyond just waiting for your inheritance. The mention of waiting for inheritance caused all three of my children to stiffen slightly. I had deliberately chosen that phrase to see how they would react to having their real motivations acknowledged directly. Their discomfort confirmed that they understood the implications of my word choice. Emma chose that moment to approach with her drawing tablet, asking if she could show me her latest artistic creation. The interruption provided a brief respite from the tension, but it also highlighted the generational differences in our family gathering. While the adults were engaged in careful strategic conversation about money and control, the children were simply enjoying creative play and family time. "Grandma, look what I drew," Emma said, climbing onto my lap with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved unconditionally. Her picture showed our house surrounded by flowers, with stick figures representing the entire family standing together in the garden. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. I love how you drew everyone together." I hugged her close, savoring the pure affection that contrasted so sharply with the calculated interactions I was having with her mother. Jessica watched this exchange with visible calculation, clearly evaluating whether Emma's presence was helping or hindering her position in the conversation. The fact that she would view her own daughter's innocent affection in strategic terms demonstrated how thoroughly her relationship with me had been corrupted by financial consideration. After Emma returned to playing with her cousins, Jessica attempted to redirect the conversation toward more specific details about the trust requirements. "Mom, you mentioned different requirements for each of us, based on our individual circumstance. Can you give us some examples of what you have in mind?" Well, Jessica, for you, I'm thinking about requirements related to marketing leadership and nonprofit management. Since those align with your professional background, you'd need to complete advanced certifications in both areas and demonstrate practical application through volunteer work with established charitable organizations. Jessica's face went pale as she realized that her inheritance would be tied to significant additional work and education rather than simply arriving as a windfall she could spend freely. The requirements I had outlined would take years to complete and would require genuine commitment rather than superficial participation. For Michael, the focus would be on business turnaround and financial analysis, given his consulting background. He'd need to demonstrate success in improving the performance of struggling companies and show mastery of advanced financial planning techniques. Michael's reaction was even more dramatic than Jessica. He had clearly expected to use his inheritance to solve his existing business problems rather than having to prove his business skills before accessing the funds. The irony that he would need to become financially successful in order to inherit money was not lost on him. And Sarah, for you, the requirements would involve art curation and cultural philanthropy. You'd need to complete formal training in museum management and demonstrate your ability to organize successful exhibitions and cultural programs. Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. Mom, that sounds like you're asking us to completely change our career paths just to access our inheritance. These aren't just requirements. They're demands that we reshape our entire lives around your expectation. Her reaction revealed the fundamental difference between our perspectives. I saw the requirements as opportunities for growth and development that would benefit them regardless of the inheritance. She saw them as obstacles preventing her from accessing money she believed was rightfully hers. Sarah, I'm not asking you to change your career path. I'm asking you to develop your skills and expand your impact in ways that align with your stated interests. If you're truly passionate about art and culture, these requirements should feel like exciting opportunities rather than burdens. Patricia had been listening to this exchange with growing concern, and she finally spoke up again. Eleanor, I think what everyone is struggling with is the sudden shift from a traditional inheritance structure to something that feels more like a performance evaluation. Can you help us understand what prompted this change in your thinking? Her question was the opening I had been waiting for. Catherine and I had discussed this moment extensively, recognizing that my children's reactions to the initial announcement would determine how much additional information to reveal. Their focus on their own convenience rather than the wisdom of the approach had convinced me that they weren't ready for the gradual redemption opportunity. Catherine had suggested, Patricia, that's an excellent question. The truth is, I've become aware that my previous approach to financial support within our family may have created some unfortunate dynamics. I've realized that unconditional financial support can sometimes enable behaviors and attitudes that aren't in anyone's best long-term interest. Michael leaned forward aggressively. Mom, what exactly are you implying? Are you saying we've been irresponsible or ungrateful? Because if that's what you think, I'd like to know what we've done to give you that impression. His defensive reaction was perfect for my purpose. Rather than asking how he could address any concerns I might have, he was demanding justification for my right to structure my own estate according to my own values. The entitlement in his response validated every decision I had made over the past week. Michael, I'm not making accusations about anyone's behavior. I'm simply recognizing that financial independence and personal responsibility are skills that need to be developed through practice and challenge. If I simply hand over large sums of money without ensuring you have those skills, I wouldn't be doing my job as your mother. Jessica tried a different approach, appealing to emotion rather than logic. Mom, this doesn't feel like the kind of relationship we've always had. We've been a close family who supported each other without conditions or evaluations. This new approach feels cold and businesslike. The irony of her complaint about coldness was breathtaking, given that she had been documenting my health decline and calculating my life expectancy for months. Her idea of family support apparently involved surveillance and inheritance planning, rather than genuine care for my well-being. Jessica, I understand this represents a change, but I don't think ensuring financial responsibility is cold or businesslike. I think it's loving and practical. I want you to have the tools you need to succeed with whatever wealth you eventually receive. Sarah made one final attempt to change my mind through emotional manipulation. Mom, I just can't understand why you would want to create all this complexity and uncertainty in our family. We love you, and we thought you trusted us. This feels like you're punishing us for something we don't even understand." Her appeal to love and trust was particularly galling, since the text messages had revealed that her expressions of love were entirely tactical and her behavior demonstrated complete disregard for trust. But her mention of punishment gave me the opening I needed to reveal the true scope of what I had discovered. "Sarah, since you've mentioned trust, I think it's time for complete honesty in this conversation. I need to tell you about something I discovered recently that has significantly influenced my thinking about our family dynamics." The room grew completely silent. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and moved closer to Patricia, instinctively seeking the protection of the one adult who wasn't part of the escalating confrontation. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I had taken of their group chat conversation. "Last week, I accidentally received a text message that was intended for a private conversation between the three of you. What I discovered was months of communication about my health, my finances, and your inheritance planning that revealed a very different picture of our family relationships than what I had believed." The color drained from all three of their faces simultaneously. Jessica's carefully maintained composure cracked completely. Michael's aggressive defensiveness collapsed into panic, and Sarah's emotional appeals died in her throat. For the first time in our conversation, their reactions were completely genuine rather than strategically calculated. The group chat included detailed surveillance of my activities, speculation about my life expectancy, inventories of my possessions, and division of my assets, as if I were already dead. You had even created spreadsheets showing how you planned to liquidate my business interests and dispose of personal items that you considered worthless sentiment. Jessica found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Mom, you don't understand the context. We were just trying to be prepared and responsible about financial planning. Jessica, you photographed my medical appointments from parking lots and created what you called a health timeline to track my decline. You discussed my death as if it were a business opportunity rather than the loss of your mother. That goes far beyond responsible financial planning." Michael attempted damage control. "Mom, I know some of those messages might have sounded harsh, but we were just trying to understand our family's financial situation. We didn't mean any disrespect." "Michael, you researched inheritance tax strategies and contacted estate appraisers to value my properties without my knowledge or consent. You treated my assets as if they already belonged to you while asking me for loans to prop up your failing business." Sarah tried tears, though they seemed more strategic than genuine. "Mom, we never meant to hurt you. We love you so much, and we were just scared about the future. We didn't know how to talk to you about these things directly." "Sarah, you photographed my belongings during family dinners to create an inventory for estate sales. You researched auction values for my art collection while sitting at my table and telling me how much you enjoyed our time together. That wasn't fear about the future. That was calculated deception. The evidence was overwhelming, and my children's attempts at explanation only made their betrayal more obvious." Patricia looked genuinely shocked, suggesting that she had been unaware of the surveillance activity. The children continued playing quietly, oblivious to the fact that their parents' inheritance expectations were evaporating in real time. "So you see," I continued, "the trust structures aren't arbitrary requirements imposed without reason. They're designed to address specific deficiencies in character and judgment that your own communications revealed. If you want to inherit wealth from someone, you need to demonstrate that you value that person as more than just a source of money." Michael made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Mom, we made mistakes in how we talked about these things, but that doesn't change the fact that we love you and want what's best for our family. Can't we work through this together and find a solution that addresses your concerns without these extreme measures?" "Michael, the trust structures aren't extreme measures. Their educational opportunity. If you can demonstrate the character traits and capabilities they require, you'll receive your full inheritance plus the additional benefits of the skills you've developed. If you can't or won't meet the requirements, then you'll have proven that my concerns were justified." Jessica tried a different approach. "Mom, what about the grandchildren? Emma and the twins don't deserve to suffer because of mistakes their parents made." Surely you want to ensure their security and opportunity. The grandchildren have separate education trusts that are completely protected regardless of your inheritance status. Their college tuition, graduate school expenses, and educational opportunities are guaranteed. What they won't have is access to money that could be misused by parents who see inheritance as an entitlement rather than a responsibility. The mention of protected education trusts seemed to hit Jessica particularly hard, as she realized that her ability to use the grandchildren as emotional leverage had been eliminated. The funds would go directly to educational institutions, rather than through family members who might have other priorities. Sarah made one final emotional appeal. "Mom, please don't let some private text messages destroy the family relationships we've built over decades. We can change how we communicate and approach these topics. We can earn back your trust without these formal legal structures." "Sarah, the text messages didn't destroy our family relationships. They revealed that our family relationships were never what I thought they were. You've been performing love and respect while planning for my death and calculating your inheritance for months. That's not something that can be fixed with better communication." The conversation had reached its natural conclusion. My children now understood that their inheritance expectations were permanently altered, and that their surveillance and manipulation had been discovered. The trust structures would require them to develop genuine character and capabilities, rather than simply waiting for my death to solve their financial problems. Patricia gathered the children and prepared to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama that was unfolding. Emma hugged me goodbye with the same innocent affection she had shown throughout the visit, reminding me once again why the separate education trusts were so important. The grandchildren deserved protection from their parents' poor judgment and character flaws. As my children filed out of my home, their body language revealed the complete collapse of their strategic plans. Jessica's shoulders sagged with the weight of realizing that her inheritance would require years of additional education and community service. Michael's aggressive posture had been replaced by defeated resignation as he contemplated having to fix his business problems without access to my money. Sarah's tears had shifted from strategic to genuine as she grasped that her lifestyle expectations would need to be dramatically revised. The house felt different after they left, lighter somehow, as if a burden I hadn't fully recognized had been lifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what my children were really thinking or whether their expressions of love were genuine. I knew exactly where I stood with them, and I had taken appropriate action to protect both my legacy and their long-term development. Over the following weeks, my children's reactions to the estate plan changes revealed everything I needed to know about their true character. Jessica hired an attorney to explore challenging the trust structures, demonstrating that her primary concern remained accessing my money rather than addressing the behaviors that had prompted the changes. Michael intensified his requests for business loans, apparently hoping that emotional pressure might override my new approach to family financial support. Sarah alternated between angry confrontations and tearful apologies, neither of which included genuine acknowledgement of how her surveillance had violated our relationship. The trust administrators I had selected began implementing the educational and community service requirements, offering my children clear pathways to earn their inheritance through personal development and social contribution. Jessica rejected the nonprofit management training, claiming it was irrelevant to her career goals. Michael refused to participate in the business turnaround program, insisting that his existing skills were sufficient. Sarah initially showed interest in the museum management courses, but withdrew after learning that the program would require 2 years of intensive study. Their reactions confirmed that they were more interested in receiving my wealth than in becoming worthy of it. The trust structures would remain in place, available if they ever developed the maturity and character necessary to meet the requirements, but locked away from their immediate access indefinitely. The charitable foundations I had established began their work immediately, funding scholarships for disadvantaged students, supporting environmental conservation projects, and building the community center that would honor Marcus's memory. Watching these projects take shape gave me more satisfaction than any inheritance distribution could have provided. My wealth was creating positive impact in the world rather than enabling my children's financial irresponsibility. 6 months after the family meeting,
I received a letter from Jessica's attorney threatening litigation over the estate plan changes. The legal challenge was predictable but ultimately futile, since Catherine had structured the trusts to withstand exactly this kind of attack. The letter did reveal that Jessica had been researching my mental competency, apparently hoping to have me declared incapable of making financial decisions. The irony was perfect. My children had criticized me for being out of touch, but their own behavior demonstrated complete disconnection from reality. They had expected to inherit wealth without earning it, to receive love without giving it, and to maintain relationships without honesty or respect. They had lived in a fantasy world where inheritance was an entitlement rather than a gift, where surveillance was acceptable family behavior, and where manipulation was a substitute for genuine connection. Michael's business finally collapsed 8 months after our family meeting, when he could no longer secure the loans that had been propping up his failing operations. He approached me for emergency financial assistance, offering to meet any conditions I might set for the help. But his desperation felt opportunistic rather than genuine, and I declined to provide funding for a business model that had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Sarah's financial situation deteriorated more gradually, as her day trading losses mounted and her living expenses continued to exceed her income. She eventually moved back in with Jessica, creating a living arrangement that strained both of their resources and relationship. The sisterly cooperation they had shown while planning my inheritance surveillance disappeared when they had to actually support each other rather than simply waiting for my money. Meanwhile, my own life flourished in ways I hadn't experienced since Marcus's death. Without the emotional burden of maintaining relationships with people who saw me primarily as a source of wealth, I was free to pursue friendships and activities that brought genuine joy and fulfillment. I joined the board of directors for several nonprofit organizations, where my business experience and philanthropic interests were valued for their own merit rather than as means to access my resources. The dating life that had so worried my children became a source of renewed energy and companionship. I met Robert at a charity fundraiser, a widowed professor of art history whose intellect and kindness reminded me that relationships could be based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than financial calculation. Our friendship developed slowly and naturally without the pressure of inheritance concerns or family surveillance. Most importantly, I rediscovered my sense of purpose and agency. The woman who had built a business empire through strategic thinking and decisive action had been suppressed for years by maternal guilt and the desire to maintain family harmony at any cost. The betrayal that had initially devastated me had ultimately liberated me from constraints that had been limiting my potential for growth and happiness. The education trusts I had established for my grandchildren began producing their intended results as Emma, Jake, and Lily grew older. Their parents' financial struggles meant that they developed appreciation for educational opportunities and financial responsibility that they might not have learned in more privileged circumstances. When Emma won a science fair competition, her pride in her achievement was genuine rather than the entitled expectation that rewards would come without effort. The community center built in Marcus's memory opened 2 years after the family meeting, featuring programs for disadvantaged youth, senior citizens, and families struggling with various challenges. The opening ceremony was attended by hundreds of people whose lives would be improved by the facility, creating a legacy that honored my husband's values in ways that simple inheritance never could have achieved. My children were invited to the opening ceremony, but none of them attended. Jessica was apparently still bitter about the inheritance changes and unwilling to acknowledge the positive impact of my philanthropic activities. Michael was dealing with bankruptcy proceedings related to his failed business and claimed he couldn't take time away from legal meetings. Sarah was working 2 part-time jobs to support herself and said she couldn't afford the time away from work. Their absence was disappointing but not surprising. They had never understood that true wealth came from contributing to something larger than oneself rather than simply accumulating money for personal consumption. The community center represented everything they had rejected when they chose to focus on inheritance planning rather than character development. Standing at the podium during the dedication ceremony, looking out at families who would benefit from Marcus's Memorial Community Center, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with money or inheritance. My wealth was creating lasting positive impact. My legacy would extend far beyond my lifetime, and my values would continue influencing the world long after I was gone. The children I had raised had chosen a different path, prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term growth and viewing relationships as transactions rather than bonds of genuine affection. Their inheritance remained available in the trust structures, waiting for them to develop the character necessary to access it responsibly, but I no longer held any expectation that they would choose that kind of personal growth. Sometimes I reflected on the text message that had started this entire journey. That accidental revelation of my children's surveillance and planning had initially felt like the worst moment of my life, the destruction of everything I believed about family love and loyalty. But it had actually been a gift, freeing me from illusions that had been constraining my happiness and preventing me from using my resources according to my deepest values. My children had indeed been correct about one thing in their private communication. I had been out of touch, but not in the way they had meant. I had been out of touch with my own power, my own worth, and my own right to expect respect and genuine affection from the people I love. Their betrayal had reconnected me with the strength and strategic thinking that had made my success possible in the first place. The woman who had discovered those text messages at 3:47 in the morning had been a passive victim of manipulation, hoping to maintain family relationships through financial generosity and emotional accommodation. The woman who stood at the community center dedication 2 years later was an active creator of her own legacy, using her resources strategically to create positive change while protecting herself from those who would exploit her love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.